Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to talk about this, the Jonsbo N3. This is Jonsbo's latest NAS chassis for compact storage in a desktop form for your NAS data, for your remote cloud, from your private cloud, and ultimately to get you away from your Google Drive, your Dropbox, your etc., and move your data onto something that you own. At the same time, not going for something a bit known as turnkey. These are your solutions over here. They arrive pre-built, they've got the software included, but this allows you to go your own way, use your open source software, build your own system from scratch, but at the same time, actually get a chassis that has been designed for 24/7 use, not just reuse an old case you got knocking around. Now, full massive huge disclaimer straight off the bat, this is not the Jonsbo N3 build video that I've been promising. Right now, we've got the case and we've got about half of the components here in the studio. Hopefully on screen you'll see that we've still got 3 components, and one of them pretty significantly being the CPU and the motherboard still to arrive here at the studio. I was going to wait it out, maybe wait till those parts arrive and film the build and show you guys, but I just thought that would take too much time, and we are still going to do it, but I thought in the interim, for those of you that are still on the fence about buying this system, I'm going to make 2 videos. Today's video, we're going to do the hardware review of this and sort of look at the construction, things we like and what we don't like. We're also going to make a video with a direct comparison with this, the Jonsbo N2. That's another video that's going to come up soon, and we're going to talk about the jumping points. And a number of you are going to wonder about whether to go for this or this, and it's not just, by the way, about one having more bays of storage. It's actually quite a few reasons why this is superior to the N2, and if that's something you're going to use, well, you need to go for it. But I'm stepping on the toes of that video that I'm going to record after this one. This video is specifically about the Jonsbo N3, and right away off the bat, one of the things I've really got to address about this is the price. For those of you that have been looking around at buying this, one of the big put-offs for I think a lot of users is just how bloody long it's going to take to arrive. Whether you're in Europe, the US, or even in the East, the odds of getting this shy of a week to 10 days minimum, more likely to a month, is pretty slim. Getting this thing quick is pretty tough at the moment. Notwithstanding that Jonsbo isn't exactly oversaturating the market with stock, the majority of the stock of this item is still in the East. Some UK and US stockists have kept a few units in their own regions, and for those units retail for about 200 to 250% more than buying it from Eastern retailers, again predominantly Aliexpress, but there's a few out there. But the result of that is pricing is inconsistent beyond all measure. I have seen this thing knocking around for about 70 nicker and then some insane shipping, the old eBay 99p item 50 quid shipping trick. I've seen some places knock it around for about 15 quid shipping, and this knocking around for about 100 nicker. And even if you try to rebalance shipping and unit cost, there is no cohesion with the pricing. Now, I'd love to say it's because this device is new. I'd love to say because the Jonsbo N3 is pretty new, that's why the pricing's all over the place. But unfortunately, the Jonsbo N2 has been around for a while and it still suffers that same problem. So, although it's a bit of a spoiler alert for the later part of this video, for the most part, I really like this system. I will say, Jonsbo, if you're listening to this, get your pricing and availability in order. It is all over the shop. It's inconsistent, and it's a real put-off for people looking to go DIY when they know they can go to their local retailer for a CPU, MoBo, PSU and everything, but the case is anywhere from a week to a month. But I'll stop moaning. So, straight away, as you can already make out between that, and I'm going to keep the N2 on the table for a lot of reasons in this video, it is effectively a very similar case design between the two of them. What they've done is improve the dimensions in a number of different ways. It's a fraction deeper, it's a fraction taller, and it's a fraction wider. Now, a big argument for that is, of course, the 8 bays of storage. This device arrives with 8 individual storage bays there. They are SATA, but you can't attach SAS drives in there because they are combined SAS SATA ports there. Again, it will come down to your MoBo of choice, and of course if you're using kind of SATA based cards, more on that later on. But based on those dimensions, what they've done inside this case is allowing those 8 bays of storage, whereas in this one you had 5 and an empty block that was being utilised for the PSU. More on that later on. Now, this device supports, as mentioned, 8 3.5-inch bays. There's also a cavity inside for a 2.5-inch bay SATA 4 inside, presumably as an OS drive. But of course, the majority of MoBos these days arrive with M2 slots on board, which almost certainly you're going to use for your NAS OS, your true NAS, your whatever inside there. Now, if we look at that front panel there, we've got some of those mainline ports there at the front, and I'm pleased to say there isn't just a USB-C port there, but it's actually USB 3.2 Gen 2. We've had a little look at the F panel cables inside, and it is a 10 gig USB connector there on the front, which is quite nice. There's also individual LEDs there for all 8 of the drives, as long as you attach that F panel. That is something that was absent there on the N2, and something a lot of users were kind of, where the hell is it about it? Don't just give us a solitary LED light of activity there. Now, there is an enormous ventilation panel here on the top. Let's bring that closer. Now, that huge ventilation panel there is because there is no ventilation there on the top. There's ventilation on the sides, on either one of them there, and the rear is absolutely riddled in ventilation. But, again, making comparisons to the N2, watch out for that dedicated video. One of the biggest differences between these two is that height differential there, because once you put them side by side, you notice that it really is this top cavity where all of that additional spacing is the most beneficial from. Not only because inside there it allows you to use larger CPU fans and heat sinks, trading up from the 65mm height support on this one up to 130mm, so 13 centimeter depth. But on top of that, that allows for a larger heat dissipation panel, but the air is now had to be reshaped, or at least targeted through the system, hence why they've now removed that top panel but now alleviated it into that front panel. There is, if we turn it around, support there on the rear for additional fans. You could get some nocturs like slapped there in the back there, which would even further support the passive airflow throughout the course of this system. But another thing a number of you may have seen there on the rear is the 2 PCIe slots. Now, when I first was researching whether to go for the N3, because for our 100k video where we did a build of the Jonsbo N2, me and Eddie genuinely considered getting this one first. And one of the things that made us consider it was those 2 PCIe slots. Those 2 PCIe slots, we were like, oh cool, it means we can use an ATX board. No, it means you can't still use that. This system supports still ITX MoBos inside. Those are the much smaller motherboards which can fit inside these more compact cases. It also supports DTX motherboards, more on that in a moment. But the result is that even though we've got those 2 PCIe slots, you can still only use one card, because ITX boards only have one PCIe upgrade slot. You can use double height cards, and the majority of ITX boards arrive with a x16 slot. So again, you could use a decent little GPU card, which has got the kind of side-by-side barreled connection for the visual out, or you can use certain network interface cards that are double height, or cards that require a great deal more heat dissipation and active cooling. They're going to be a great deal thicker. That's why those 2 slots exist. But unfortunately, don't look at those 2 slots thinking you can get away with the larger ATX cards. Sadly, you can't. Now, I mentioned DTX cards earlier on, and we're going to whip the top off when we go through that in a bit more detail. But that is one of the few exceptions to the rule where you can get away with multiple slots there inside. And that is at least an option to take advantage of those 2 PCIe slots in there. But DTX MoBos are generally more expensive. They're more custom made. You can get some pretty decent ones out there in the market, but once you go down that road, you end up spending more for that DTX card than if you've just gone for a case. I think like the D7, for example, which is an ATX supported case, and you end up spending more for a slightly more clipped experience. Now, one of the things you may also have noticed while looking at the rear of this casing, where's the PSU? Because you're right, there's our PSU port, or we've got our 2 fans. Where's the PSU? The PSU is one of the 2 things about this case that really put me off, and that is it's inside with a separate connected power cable. The fact that there isn't a power brick that I can't slide in and out is really strange to me in this case. This utilises a not dissimilar logic to external PSUs or PSU external adapters, where the PSU lives inside, is fed into a patch cable, and then your external mains power is connected into a patch cable. It's not tremendously bad, but I'm not sure how I feel about that design. Of course, trying to include a PSU block down here would have extended the size of the case or reduced the capacity to have two of those fans that are on the rear. But it's still an unusual choice for the internal PSU on this, something that will make a little bit more sense later, and particularly when we do our build. Now, if we remove the two fan thumb screws from the bottom, we can take a little look at how this system manages the inclusive fans. It's got two fans rather than the one fan that's on the N2, and it utilizes a prerequisite and pre-attached fan brick there. Of course, you can choose to use your own fans. They come off very, very easily. And when we get this done for the build, no doubt we'll see just how much noise these make. But the idea that you can have these two fans and attach a couple more fans here at the top is pretty sweet indeed. And in the description, there should be links to not only recommended builds that I've been looking at for the Jonsbo N3, but on top of that, there will also be links to additional or alternative quieter fans that you could go for inside this build. Now, if we look at that internal there, no doubt on screen we've got some of our close-up recordings there. You can see all of those lovely connectors there on the rear. Now this is where your SATA multi-lanes are going to be kicking in there. You're going to be attaching each one of those, utilising the funneling cavity there at the top to feed into that motherboard. That's one of the other reasons, and I mentioned this in a previous video, why this case kind of has an inconsistency for me, and that goes for the N2 as well, that you end up with a case that on the one hand supports all of these lovely drives, but a motherboard in the form of an ITX, which rarely arrives with more than about 4 to 5 SATA ports there. So you end up either having to use those little patch cards, which are going to be driver dependent, or you're going to have to utilise PCIe cards that are either going to work as RAID cards or standard PCIe cards like this one, which has a 5-port SATA multi-lane adapter, which is all good news, don't get me wrong. It's nice to be able to have the option to add those extra ports, but it's a shame to use up what is more than likely your only PCIe slot for something as minimal as a SATA multi-lane card there, when really what you want that PCIe slot to be doing is to be, you know, populated with a 10 GBE card, a dual port 10 GBE card. Hell, going for combo cards that have got M2 NVMe slots and 10 GBE on a single card. It's a real shame to be using up that one PCIe slot that an ITX board has for a SATA or SAS multi-lane card. Also, another thing about this, and this is something I'm going to look into during my build, we've got the two white expected Molex connectors that are going to be feeding off of our PSU to power that board and all of the drives, but also a SATA power over here. Can you see it? There is a SATA power connector next to that Molex, which is really odd because I don't think those 8 drives are going to require 2 Molex and a SATA power to keep things moving. Now, maybe it's because some PSUs only have a single Molex, and therefore you're going to be bridging between the Molex and the SATA power. I'm still not certain about the amount of oomph coming through from one of each of those into that board, and that's something I'm going to have to look into. And what I don't want to do is accidentally blow the board. But what I will say is when you go for the accessories that this device arrives with, the instructions are, I'm going to say, questionable. You know, they're perfunctory. They give you what's inside. There are diagrams. It's multi-language, which is good. But it really does not go into a vast amount of detail. And there's not a lot of information available online about certain configurations. And certainly that board where I'd be worried about overpowering it, or that support of SATA and SAS. Now, one of the things I didn't include in the intro for this video was an unboxing, and the reason being, it would have been boring as all hell. Because there's the box it arrives with. Again, if you see, I chucked out a YouTube short on this. It arrives, you know, very well packaged. It's, you know, covered in a bag. It's got this nice bit of hard foam to arrive in there. And the accessories, you know, there's a lot of them, but the instructions, they're not the most straightforward. Inside, you get your screws and washers and cable ties for the internal mechanics of the system, and you end up with all of those rubber seals for the trays, or at least the handles, something I'll touch on later. But again, as far as the SATA power on that back board there, I'm kind of surprised what we've got going on there, and how well that's going to work is, you know, I'm not so sure with regards to the extra power. Now, let's make our way into the top of this case. We grab ourselves our Allen key, and I will say, this is again one of the few areas of this case that I'm not overly keen on. It seems really odd to me that so much of this case either uses those thumb screws, as I mentioned earlier on, or they use traditional crosshead screws. But when it comes to removing the top lid of this, something every single user is going to do, whether that is to upgrade the memory or for the full installation, and you have to use this rather small Allen key adapter, which, don't get me wrong, does make these screws quite flush with the external casing, but there's plenty of flathead Phillips screws that could do just the same thing, and it seems an odd inconsistency to have to use this Allen key to get the job done. Now, when I talk about that Allen key, those that remember either, you know, from this channel or other channels, people reviewing the N2, you'll know that inside there you've got this little rubber panel here, and this rubber panel holds this Allen key. This doesn't have that. On the front there, there's no position for that Allen key. So if you lose this and you don't have an Allen key to hand, getting inside the top of this case will be an effing nightmare. So let's make our way in even further. We remove our lid. Once again, no ventilation there at the top. It is metal all the way around. Lovely bit of heat dissipation. And there inside is the inside of our casing. Now again, it does seem pretty large, right? Unfortunately, again, I've asked Jonsbo directly over some emails, and again, do check out the Jonsbo article below. It's got a big FAQ where I put your most common questions from my previous video to them about this. So if there's something you don't know about this, there's a good chance it's in that article. And that front panel, which you can see, not only have we got that cable there, that ribbon cable that's running all the way through, which is our power for those individual LED ports there on the front. We have got all of those lovely connectors for that F panel, but just bear in mind that this is, because of USB 3.2 Gen 2, a relatively specialist selection of cables there. And again, some of which are just simply not present on ITX motherboards and are going to require an adapter. These are only going to set you back 5, 10, maybe 15 nicker, but at the same time, I just wish this case was just a fraction bigger to allow me to take advantage of ATX MoBos. When you're looking at 8 bays of storage, that is a lot of data to be getting on with, and therefore having the option for another PCIe slot to really capitalise on it, or because of the height of this thing, allowing us to take advantage of higher and deeper CPU fans and heatsinks. It means you can start looking at i5s, your i7s, your i9s. I'm looking at an i9, I don't know if you saw that at the beginning. We're going to be putting in a 12th gen i9 with a slightly more compact heatsink to still get in, but we're still going to be within that remit. I'm going to be using a 12th gen i9 14 core processor, 6 performance, 8 efficient cores, and 32 gig of memory. That is a lot of oomph inside this system, with 8 bays of storage to play with, and I've only got 1 PCIe slot to play with. So ATX support would have been lovely on this. Yes, it would have changed the shape of the system, but I think they could have accommodated it, and they run a lot of gamer cases, and you know, most gamer systems, they run on those bigger MoBos, and I think they could have at least extended this out. Now, inside, you can see this small bracket here on the side. Now, this small bracket, if I bring that closer to camera, that small bracket there, I originally thought was where our 2.5 inch drive was going to go in, but it's not. That is where our PSU lives. Our power brick, an SFX power brick, by the way, PSU, slots inside there and is connected to this, that internal power connector. This is what allows the system to have our PSU here mounted at the front of the system with no access cavity without removing it, and running all the way to the back to that additional connector there at the bottom. Again, not the end of the world, and I understand that they've tried to keep this case as compact as possible, but I am slightly concerned about the heat, because that power brick is now going to block a large area of airflow right there. It's going to fill up that cavity. Now remember, This system arrives with fans on the base panel, and there is room to add fans here at the back, but they don't arrive as standard. But even if you add those fans, that airflow that's passing through is going to meet that PSU. So obviously the PSU placement and its own fan and vents are going to be very, very important. Also, on top of that, the PSU is going to be very close to that MoBo. Now, the MoBo is going to be ITX, so it's only going to come to about there, so there won't be too much overlap. But nonetheless, I'm not really looking forward to when I build this to work out the PSU versus MoBo placement on this, and it really is going to be a question of getting the timing of positioning those SATA cables, that motherboard and that PSU just right, because if I do that in the wrong order, I am going to have to dismantle the whole system to move just one component. It's not a huge complaint about this, because I think people should plan these things out quite substantially before they build them, but nevertheless, that is something I'm going to have to be very mindful of during the build process on this. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and I sort of alluded to it earlier on, it's something that I mentioned in my N2 video, and it's something I've not really heard enough people complain about, so maybe I'm the one with the frigging problem, and that is, I do not like the way they handle drives. So those drives there at the top, and I think the irony of me pulling it out like that and saying I don't like it, it can be pointed out in the comments. But there isn't trays. What you have are these rubber handles and those rubber guides right there. Now these slot in like so. You've got guidelines based on the bottom of the casing all the way along the bottom. And it guides the drive in like so. It slides in and you hear it connect with that SATA at the back. Now, on the face of it, that should be more than enough. Also, there is the counter argument that those rubber seals and that rubber handle are going to assist in minimizing the vibration noise throughout the chassis. Because remember, this is a metal chassis through and through. They might assist with dampening a lot of those vibration noises. And you know what? There might be proof in the pudding for that. But me personally, give me a tray any day of the week. Because when it comes to hot swapping, when it comes to swapping out a drive that's gone into a degraded state, trays for me just feel a lot more integral. And regardless of, people liking these, I don't feel when I'm pulling that, there's no elasticity to it, there's no ejection feeling to it. And when you pull it, it just comes forward real hard. Now, obviously right now I can put my hand all the way around that drive. But in the case of this one, pulling that drive out doesn't feel as smooth as a tray by any regard. And it's only when all four of the washers that surround this drive make it into that slot that it feels nice. It feels like it's being guided in. But as soon as you get as little as, what is that, like a 1.5 centimeters, maybe 2 centimeters out, once that drive goes just that small distance out, it's completely off those runners. And that doesn't feel great to me when I'm pulling that drive out, that there's all this wobble. Particularly, obviously, if you're taking a drive out because it's failed, you're not going to be as worried about moving it and the vibration of the shaking of the drive, because obviously it's not going to be completely powered down for that poor drive when you introduce a new one. But I'm just not keen on these rubber seals when I know trays just do a better job. But these are all very small complaints. If we move away from my little complaints about tiny little Allen key screws, if we move away from rather odd placement of PSUs, which arguably to maintain a chassis of this size makes sense, if we move away from my complaints about this device's support of only ITX and DTX MoBos, once again, a question of remaining within that chassis, moving away from those complaints, it is inarguable that once again, the Jonsbo N3 is an enviably fantastic case, and it is popular for a reason. Now, we're going to put this back together because I'm going to film a video shortly after this, as mentioned, comparing it against the N2. And I'm going to highlight the very specific differences. And I found 5 or 6, maybe 7 technically, of main differences that I think you will need to know before choosing between them, because it really is a yes or no answer to a lot of those to help you decide which is best for you. It is not just a big old pile of storage there. So do stay tuned for that. And of course, as soon as the rest of the components arrive, when we film our Jonsbo N3 build, stick around for that, and definitely watch out for how many retakes I'm going to have to do to make sure I get that MoBo PSU and the cabling in the right frigging order. Stay tuned for that. There's links in the description. to other guides that we've written on the N2 and some of our build-up stuff for the N3. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know if you have. Use the free advice section if you need help for your own DIY or turnkey NAS build. Use the free Discord community there. Head over to the Ask NAS Compares forum or join us on Ko-Fi and Patreon if not only do you want expedited support from us, but also join our monthly seminar videos and content review and access to a lot of these videos in advance. Almost certainly the Jonsbo N3 video will be build video will be available on there for quite a while before it becomes just a general public video, so stay tuned for that. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time.